Hi, everyone. I think we're live now. So I am Kelly with Two Broads Talking Politics. This is Two Broads Talking Politics Live. Super exciting. And we are talking today with Tory Gavito. Tory is the co-founder and president of Way to Win. Hi, Tory.
Hi, Kelly. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining me. So let's start with just a little bit of background. Tell me a little bit about who you are, what your background is, and what Way to Win is.
Well, I'm a lawyer by trade. I practiced for many, many, many years in the cross section between immigrant rights and labor rights. Worked in Mexico for a period of time, working with migrant workers, and came back to Texas was living in Mexico for a while, and came back to Texas maybe in 2012, I want to say. It was right at the end of the Obama years. I missed the Obama years. I don't know what was wrong with me. But in any case, and I came back, and I'll just never forget hearing Julian Castro speak at the DNC convention. And he was talking about his grandmother, Victoria, who had worked hard to make a living for his family. My grandmother's name is Victoria. She worked hard to make a living for her family. And there was just something in the air in that time in Texas. Battleground Texas had just formed. And I was just looking for a way in. There's only so many deportation cases you can sit through. There's only so many wage claims you can hear before you realize the entire system's broken. And we need a whole new level of people governing for us. And so really caught the bug around that time period.
Yeah. And so, and now you've started Way to Win. What is Way to Win?
So Way to Win at its heart is a donor community. We're a community of over nearly 200 people now who give in all ranges, small and large, to make sure that there's a way to win, that there's a path to victory. So there's kind of a name in the game, or a game in the name, in the sense that, like, we're not just about winning. We actually want to shift power. And so, we're not looking at elections as a horse race. We realize that real lives are at stake. And if real lives are at stake, then we should listen to people who are on the front lines, who have the most to lose by another 4 years of Trump, and listen to them about what's going to make their lives better, and get in early. If we invest in local organizers very early, they can start to build out huge cadres of a movement and really push against these political regimes. And I will say too, it's not just about what's happening in the White House. We know that we're tracking 390 down ballot races across the battleground states this year. And we think that, district attorneys and sheriffs and school board have sometimes more impact on the daily life of people than even the White House does. And so, come hell or high water tomorrow, we know we're going to deepen that bench with the 390 people running that we're tracking. And that's going to be a good thing for democracy.
You're speaking my language. I love down ballot. All right. So let's talk Texas. In Texas this year, it's a battleground for the first time in decades at the presidential level. It's got a competitive Senate race. It's got a bunch of U.S. House races that are competitive, and there's a chance of flipping the state house. So talk to me about Texas, about what the energy is like right now on the ground.
Yeah. So Texas, the story of Texas really is about a 10-year plan. What's happening right now in Harris County is by design, not by accident. There were local leaders who poured over the data. I would say really starting in 2010 was when our set of comadres formed. And I do say comadres because there's women of color and Latinas who were just like, took the levers of power from some of the dudes that had been the power brokers at the time. And, for the reason Texas is red, despite its demographics looking very similar to California's, is that the power brokers that were in place really said, demographics will be destiny. We can just rely on that Latino vote one day, and we're just going to swing white voters along the way. Well, it turns out you have to talk to everybody. It turns out you actually have to prove yourself a worthy candidate to get a Latino vote. They're not just going to come out. I remember reading a book where one of the operatives actually called the Latino vote candy coming out of a piñata. It's like, are you kidding me? So in any case, these women came together and like, we know how to read a voter file, and we see that there are these local races where there's so many people of color. And the story of Texas is a multiracial Texas. This is not just a Latino story. There are Asian Americans that are voting more than ever before, and certainly burgeoning communities in Houston, Dallas. Harris County has ballot guides in 4 languages right now, including Chinese and Vietnamese. Like, this is an incredibly diverse community. And of course, Black Texans have always had a role in pushing progress forward. And so in any case, these local organizers looked at the data, realized if you scrapped this idea of persuasion and went straight into turning out what we call high potential voters, these are this is what like the dude operatives would call low propensity voters, that if we talk to them, we could actually create a whole new electorate. And so starting in 2010, that's exactly what they did. And every single year, not just cycle, but year, because there are, local elections in the off years too. Every single year, they started marching forward a whole new electorate. And then you fast forward to 2016. So this is my favorite story about Texas. Okay, so in 2012, Barack Obama won Harris County by 971 votes. Because of our work in Houston over time and Harris County over time, Hillary Clinton won Texas in 2016 by over 160,000 votes. And then our ceiling is just really high in Texas in terms of how many more voters of color, how many young voters we have to pull in. And so by 2018, you have Beto O'Rourke blowing the roof off of Harris County, blowing the roof off of Texas completely, coming shy of just, 200,000 votes from taking the whole ticket. And that year too, I think more consequential than probably Beto's run, the most consequential run was probably Lina Hidalgo, who won the county judge race in Houston, which is our executive office. Don't ask why we call them judges. They're executive authorities. And she used her governing power to just open the gates to democracy. So Ann Richards used to say, let's just open the gates to democracy and let people in. That's what she's doing, and that's what we're seeing in Harris County now.
Yeah, so I want to talk a lot about turnout, but first, you and Beto had written a piece, I think in the Washington Post a couple weeks ago, talking about how if Biden wins Texas, that's going to be a state that counts early. We'll know on election night, tomorrow night, perhaps, and obviously Trump has no path whatsoever if Biden wins Texas. So talk to me a little bit about that piece of it, and the idea that Texas could even be competitive at the presidential level.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I feel like, the one thing we need to know is that we have to look at the strategy of tomorrow night. Florida, Pennsylvania, these are states that are rich in electoral votes. I am rooting for every single one of those votes to come our way. We also know that the count is going to take a long time. And in some ways, the Republicans' hold on voting access in Texas this cycle could actually be their undermining, in the sense that we're not going to have a long time to count votes. We know that we're going to have a sense of where we are by tomorrow night. And so, Beto and I looked at the data. We've been looking at it for a long time, but we're like, it's time to actually share this story nationally, because it's like, we know for a fact that polling undercounts potential in Texas. And places like Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and Michigan, there are pollsters out there saying that there could be people that are, hidden Trump supporters, that the polling may overcount Biden's actual standing. Whereas in Texas, because there are so many high potential voters who just haven't voted yet, these are the people that are lower on the propensity scale, you just can't adequately poll for that kind of turnout. And so historically, our candidates do better than performing on election night. Beto himself performed about 3.8 better than his polls predicted. And so this cycle with Biden polling neck and neck, we just had another poll this morning that put him at 48 or something, it just, with Biden neck and neck, you can't count for those 600% and turnout that's increased in the youth vote. You can't account for, new Latino voters. You can't account for new Asian American voters. You can't account for new Black voters. And so we just think that this is a math question, not a magic question. Texas is trending. It's going to be this year. It's going to be 2022. Or it's going to be 2024. Local data scientists had always projected 2022 was the tipping point year when the demographics and the work finally meet the opportunity. But man, if this year isn't proving to be wild. And so we think we've got a shot.
Yeah, and this is a long-term strategy too for the Democrats, right? I mean, Texas is 38 electoral votes, one of the biggest prizes out there, and is probably after the census going to gain electoral votes, where states like Illinois, New York might be losing electoral votes
and congressional seats, and we're going to gain congressional seats. So yeah, I mean, the DCCC, in terms of their looking at how they're going to expand their power in the House, has made Texas a frontline battleground just because there's so much opportunity to pick up seats. So, and we're not just looking at the top of the ticket, we're also looking way down ballot. So we have the potential to pick up the Texas House too this cycle. Again, it's kind of counterintuitive, but we had always projected that we'd win statewide before we'd win the gerrymandered House districts in Texas, just because statewide, while it's a massive scale of a project, the math is just so clear. Hillary Clinton lost by, about 800,000 votes. We've gained 2 million new voters in voter registration. We know there are about 4 million voters in 3 cities alone that you could tap and bring into the electorate who don't have prior vote potentials. That's just basic math. And it gets a little more complicated as we get into the House districts and the, of course, the congressional House districts, and then, of course, the Texas House districts that are gerrymandered purposefully to cut out potential multiracial power. So anything can happen tomorrow. It's going to be a little wild, but we're going to win a lot. We are.
Yeah. So I have spoken to a lot of people in Texas over the past couple of years, and I've heard this over and over and over again. This phrase: "Texas isn't a red state; it's a non-voting state." Nearly 10 million people have already voted in Texas in early vote, more than voted in total in 2016. So this is not a non-voting state anymore. Some of the challenges for people to vote haven't gone away. So what accounts for so much of this increase in voter participation in Texas? And, presumably there's room for lots more growth.
Oh, there's so much more growth. I mean, this is one of the reasons why I started Way to Win. I had been working in Texas politics for a period of time. I was heading to a national conference, and I knew that I would be pit against different states. They would say, "Okay, Texas, well, why would I fund you and not Florida?" Or, "Okay, Texas, why would I fund you and not Georgia or Arizona?" And I decided to dive into the data of all the states. I looked at the 2016 data, and what I saw was states like Arizona, Georgia, Texas, Florida, North Carolina, any place where there was growing demographic change, we saw marked increase in improvement for Democratic performance in the presidential cycle of 2016 with very little national investment. I mean, you have to remember, this is 2016. Like, I remember getting phone calls from my friends in Arizona saying that Brooklyn was calling them on election night, asking if Arizona was going to flip, because by the time we were getting to the east to the west coast, we were desperate for those electoral votes. Yeah. And it's like, no, Arizona's not going to flip. What did the campaign do? Maybe not that much. It wasn't actually that much, right? And so it wasn't a given in those years right after 2016, or in those months after 2016, in 2017, when everyone was reflecting on what to do next, that Arizona was going to become the clearest battleground. But what I could see was we were less than 20,000 votes from winning statewide. There were 1.2 million Latinos in the state that campaigns just needed to talk to for the first time. And that's an inherently solvable problem, and one that I wanted to jump in on and not be like, "Oh, well, we got to do Texas first." It's like, why can't we do it all? Money is not actually the problem on the Democratic side. And so we lost track of it. My point is that, like, demographic change. So as we see, like, what's accounting for this, like, surge in turnout across the Sun Belt, particularly in Texas, is a combination of movement and math. So you do have natural increases in demographic change. I mean, we hate the term demographics is destiny in Texas because it means there's like just some magic that's going to appear and people will just show up for you. But the reality is demographic booms helped, there's more young people, there's more people of color. I mean, these are natural bases for the Democratic Party. So it is a amplifier. And then you've got the movements. Then you've got groups like the Texas Organizing Project in Texas, or Lucha in Arizona, or the New Georgia Project in Georgia, who are doing deep organizing using all kinds of cultural indicators to pull people into the electorate. When you have a combination of both, and then when you have candidates that also like know that like movement's on their side, then you can go really far. So Stacey Abrams, for example, is an incredible example of when movement and math meet a champion. I think Beto is another great example. I mean, he's out there still working the streets today. He was block walking with Top last week. And so it's like when you have that sort of amplifying megaphone of a great champion, when you've got the trajectory of the demographics and when you've got the work behind you, you can win elections. We are winning elections.
Yeah. So for people who don't know Texas very well, it might be shocking to think that the state house could flip, but it's pretty close, right? Talk to me a little bit about this and what that would mean.
Well, the thing about Texas, there's a couple of things to know about Texas. One is this idea that like the suburbs are somehow a stand-in for white voters just isn't the case in Texas. In the suburbs in Texas, you've got young Latina moms, you've immigration from everywhere. I mean, I told you that Harris County has ballot guides in 4 languages. The Houston Independent School District has now translates all of their materials into nearly 100 languages. Like these are incredibly diverse communities across the urban core, across the suburbs. And so that's one thing you have to know, is that this is not a shift that's happening in gerrymandered districts because we're changing the hearts and minds of Republicans who are somehow realize that Trump doesn't stand for their values anymore. That's not what's happening. What's happening is that there's just a whole new electorate who believes in candidates that believe in an equal playing field for all. And so that's thing one. Thing two is we won House seats that we were not expecting to win in 2018 when Beto was running. And we're really close to that tipping point in the House. And it's this year, I think, particularly, I'm incredibly proud of the Texas Democratic Party. I mean, I've always been an outside strategies girl, like sign me up for the march, like sign me up for supporting the groups that are like raging against the party a little bit. But what we've learned is, or I think what's happened in Texas is we've won so much outside the party that the party's now transformed too. So the Texas Democratic Party equally is embracing the idea that winning is a multiracial coalition concept. And they are showing up for communities of color. They're showing up in all the right ways. And this particular year, they fielded a candidate in every House district in the state of Texas and are competitive in every House district in the state of Texas. I think they've determined that there's about $90 million they've evaluated worth of collective spending in all these down ballot candidates, which we've just never seen in the state of Texas before, that kind of integrated top to bottom coordinated ballot.
And it's 9 House seats, I think, that would have to flip.
It's
That's
nine
not
and
that
a half
many.
to flip. It's not that many when you consider that we won a bunch of them, like the numbers ticked up in 2018, and we're running in about 17 that we're looking at that are likely flips. So we've got a big pool to draw on to hit that 9.
And for anyone watching or listening, that, of course, would give Democrats a say in redistricting, which would be really, really big.
Which helps it helps at the federal level, too. This is federal governing at this point because of reapportionment. We're going to pick up seats in Congress. And so People listening in California or Illinois or New York should be glad that Texas progressives have more of a say in how we're drawing lines, because it's going to affect what kind of leaders we're going to get in DC.
Yeah, no, I'm in Chicago and I am ready for the fights that are going to happen because we are losing a House seat and it's going to be ugly. Of course, Democrats are in a lot of control in Illinois, so it might be ugly in a different direction. But
yeah,
so I've always kind of wondered if all of this flying around by presidential candidates, stopping at different places, makes any difference. It feels like, watching from the outside, like, what difference does it make? People are going to vote the way they're going to vote. But we just saw Kamala Harris go to Texas. First time anybody on a presidential ticket had gone to Texas in quite a while. And the turnout in those areas just jumped up. What does that do to have them come into Texas to say Texas is in play?
I think it's the scale of communication. So, I had always understood the value of the air war. Radio, TV, good narrative. I understood it, but I also felt like it was such a broad concept that with the slingshots that I bring to funding and strategies, I didn't think I could create enough of a ripple effect to shift a narrative, which is why I focused so much of our early strategies at Way to Win on field, because I feel like I can quantify field. I can generally get a sense of, if I do this many door knocks, will return this many votes, and if we hit a certain scale, I can count what I'm bringing in to get to that 50+1. And of course, people were like, Tory, you're gonna have to get a little bit beyond field. But then COVID hit, and it was like, no, Tory, now you're really gonna have to get beyond field, because we're not gonna do it like that anymore. We're not gonna. Of course, people are. Of course, now we've ended up doing a ton of field last minute. Yeah. But the point is, we made a big shift at Way to Win early in the cycle when we realized COVID was a new normal. And the first thing we did was we stayed true to our values, that we were going to stay connected with the ground groups and the local leaders, but give them what they needed to actually elevate their program, and be able to do more digitally, be able to get in the air. We've been doing a ton of experimentation on ads. I realized when we made this pivot that so much of politics and division of labor and politics is like, if you're talking about new brown and black voters, that's field. If you're talking about white voters, that's commercials. And it's as if brown and black people don't watch TV, it just doesn't make any sense. And because it's divided that way, though, it's also the majority of the content that's developed is developed for a particular lens and a particular audience. And so we realized really quickly we were going to have to disrupt some of that, those traditions, and make sure that Latinos, and make sure that a multiracial coalition saw themselves in the media that was being distributed. And so, to get to your actual question now, I think that when Kamala came to Texas, I think that Julian and other surrogates doing the bus tour across Texas. I mean, not only does this energize the local leaders who have put in so much time in Texas, getting out the vote, registering voters, and amps them up to keep doing more and really, keep their foot on the gas, but it also creates an earned media environment. And so all weekend, all I saw up in Austin was pictures of Kamala down in McAllen. And that's good, because that means more people in Texas get to hear the story that Texas is a battleground. And that's the kind of scale you can't hit in field. Believe it or not, turns out doors aren't everything. And so it's a really good thing that they've been coming to the state. And I'm hopeful that this means more and more and more forever. Texas is a battleground now forever.
Yeah, so that's what I want to sort of talk about next is, if tomorrow it turns out that Biden doesn't win Texas and MJ Hagar doesn't win in Texas, but they come pretty close, which is what it's looking like, even if they don't win, that it would be pretty close. How do we sustain that momentum going forward, the next 2 years, the next 4 years? I mean, we know in 2 years, there's a gubernatorial race in Texas that I have been predicting for a while is going to be the most expensive gubernatorial race in history. How do we all sort of keep our eyes on Texas moving forward after this year?
Yeah, well, definitely want to be the first to tell folks, even if we don't win the Texas House, even if Biden doesn't end up taking Texas, even if MJ Hagar doesn't take Texas, just track the 52 down ballot races though that we're watching, because the turnout that we're seeing today is not going to allow for there not to be a night of winning somewhere. And so I just feel like, and this is a question that we've come upon forever since I've been doing this political work. It's like, well, you know, Wendy Davis was the first sort of like turning of a ship. Wendy Davis in 2014, that was the first gubernatorial campaign where we made the shift from doing white persuasion only to actually registering new voters and talking to new voters. And when she came short, we thought, well, how on earth are we going to sustain this? We did. We just did. You know, we just hustled and we did. And then 16 came around and Clinton made gains in Texas. And of course, we won a ton of down ballot races in 16, including some critical, pivotal Harris County races, which started this trend of taking over Harris County for progressives. And then in 18, you know, Beto ran and raised a ton of money and did a ton of work. I mean, there's a lot you can say about the guy, but he works hard. And so did a ton of work, and you know, he stayed with it, and he's staying with it, and we're still doing the work, we're still finding the funding, we're still managing to make it happen. I just don't think there's any turning back. And I think you're right. I think 2022 is going to be a real referendum in the state. Again, this is when the tipping point on the math on demographics becomes very hard for Republicans to overcome. And, you know, we're still in the middle of one of the biggest public health crises I think I've ever lived through in my lifetime here in Texas. We're about to hit 1 million mark on how many people have COVID in the state. A group of friends and I started Beat Abbott Pack maybe about 3 months ago so that we could start to stockpile. I mean, Greg Abbott has a huge war chest and he is failing Texans. And so we want everyday Texans who are sick of leadership who's not following the science to, you know, support the PAC. We're going to transfer all the assets to whoever's going to run in 2022 so that they start with a running start and not from a deficit. And I'm excited. I'm excited about 2022. I think it's going to be a big year.
I think so too. I've been watching that race. Like as soon as, you know, tomorrow's over, I'm going to be like, all right, Texas governor's race. Let's do it.
Do it. All those Sun Belt governors though, you know, Ducey in Arizona, Kemp in Georgia. I mean, that man's got to go. Brian Kemp's got to go. And then of course you've got DeSantis in Florida. These governors, these Sun Belt governors are sitting on a ticking time bomb. They've got demographics that are never trending backwards, and they are doing the most to stay backward for some reason. You know, I think the only one that I've seen sort of changing course in terms of how he's dealing with the rise of progressive values among voters of color and a multiracial coalition. Honestly, it's not one of the governors, but it's John Cornyn. Like, you know, he's not running like Loeffler in Georgia, where he's running more and more to the right. He's running more to the middle. I mean, he's coming out with pro-Dreamer ads, which is just a crock because he blocked all those bills. But in any case, the fact that Cornyn's coming out a little bit softer on immigration and other issues makes me realize Republicans see the data and they are scared, particularly Texas Republicans.
Yeah, definitely. All right. So because Texas Republicans are so scared, they are doing everything in their power to make sure that people either can't vote or vote and their votes get thrown out. So tell us about this latest lawsuit in Harris County.
Well, Harris County, the young leadership in Harris County is something of dreams are made of. I mean, Lina Hidalgo, you've got Chris Hollins, who's the county clerk. There's a really, you know, the meme going around on the Twitters about the like, started like this, now it looks like this. For years, anyone doing Texas politics would have to look at this like Chef Boyardee, older dude named Stan Stanner. I mean, I'm somewhere I'm going to get daggers shot at me for saying this, but anyway, and it's just hilarious to think of like where we started and where we are now with Chris Hollins being such a champion for voting rights. So they actually have in their team Beth Stevens, voting rights expert who has worked for many years with the Texas Civil Rights Project, which is of the standard of the Brennan Center here in Texas. We've got Brennan Center trained former employees. Mimi Marziani runs it. She's president of the Texas Civil Rights Project. She used to work at the Brennan Center. She teaches voting rights law at the University of Texas Law School. So her team actually, it's one of her teammates that's actually left the Texas Civil Rights Project office to go to Harris County and work directly with the new leadership in Harris County to build out voting, all access to the ballots within the letter of the law. And in doing so, they have brought in a few sort of novel innovations, including the last night of early vote, they had a 24-hour voting. There were organizations out with artists of all kinds, just having a big parties all night in Harris County for that last night of vote. They've had drive-through voting. And I love that for like a week on MSNBC, everyone was ribbing, Rachel Maddow and others that like it happened in Texas before it happened in California. I love that. My team is half California, half Texan, and so we got a kick out of that too. But the Texas Republicans are scared. I mean, like the surges out of Harris County. When you think of the fact that in the last election, Beto O'Rourke lost just by 200,000 votes. And you see now that we're at 9 million votes this cycle before we even hit election day tomorrow. Target Smart's projecting that about 2.7 of that 9 million are first time voters, period. They didn't vote in 2016. You know that they're scared. And so they filed twice now lawsuits to disqualify the votes out in Harris County. And it's not about the novelties in voting rights. This is about just not letting the will of the people stand forward. And twice now they've been denied. They were denied at the Texas Supreme Court level. They took their petition to federal court. The federal court denied it too. And look, this was their home turf. The Texas Supreme Court is all Republican. The Fifth Circuit is notoriously, this bench of federal judges is notoriously conservative. It just shows how frivolous their lawsuits are and how scared they are.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I saw the federal judge before he ruled said, like, you're going to have to work really hard to convince me that this is a thing.
Yeah. I mean, they got knocked out on standing today. That means like they didn't even have the right plaintiffs. Yeah. So I mean, the votes are getting counted. That's the good news.
Yes. Excellent news. And
they don't even know they don't even know who those votes are. They're willing to sacrifice some percentage of their own votes to just like knock down everybody's votes. It makes no sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that was all a lot of wonderful Texas news. Is there anything else that you wanted to make sure we talk about?
My favorite thing in Texas. Well, I just really want to thank all the organizers. Crystal Zermenio from Texas Organizing Project, Michelle Tremillo from Texas Organizing Project, Brianna Brown. You've got amazing organizers at Move San Antonio. That's where they started. They're Move Texas now, that are just doing amazing youth vote. Battleground Texas has not stopped registering voters. And of course, as I mentioned, Beto and his team just have never stopped campaigning. I don't know if that man drinks a lot of coffee. I think he must, because he works really hard. He works so hard. And so I'm just so pleased at our homegrown heroes that are taking it home.
Yeah, I love it. And I saw something like 2.6 million voters called just yesterday during the day.
I know the kind of scale that we're getting right now. I love that AOC is calling Texas in these last days. I mean, we've got a lot of really superstar national heroes coming in and making this push with us. And I think it's brilliant for, the younger guard in this party to jump in and help Texas. This is a trend line. It's not a fluke. And for whatever these kids, like I'm that old, but for whatever, AOC sees as her career arc, I don't know. She could break it on your, on your show first that she's going to run when she's
AOC,
eligible.
come tell us.
Come tell two broads talking politics that you're going to run for president one day. It's in her advantage to have a huge multiracial coalition in Texas locked in.
Yeah, I love it. I gotta say, just looking at the trends and the excitement, I feel like Texas and Georgia are more likely to flip tomorrow than Florida. Something about Florida, having lived through the 2000 election, just I can never trust Florida again.
We can't ever back away from Florida. But here's my sense about Florida. My sense about Florida is the problem is that it's been treated too long as a northern swing state and not as a southern state. And what I mean by that is every 2 years, every 4 years, whenever there's a hot midterm, certainly every time there's a presidential campaign, money floods into that state, but it floods into the state on the air to just talk about candidates and to just do persuasion. So it tends to hit like a very particular kind of voter. And then what happens on the in-between is that they have less resources to drive in and do that multi-year work the way Texas was allowed to. I mean, there's a blessing and a curse to being a state that national Democrats don't care about. The curse is, of course, you've got to like hold all that scale yourself and do all that work on your own. The blessing is you can create it the way you want to. And I think that Florida organizers have just never had the kind of time and attention and resource early to do a multi-year plan. There is no reason why Florida shouldn't be trending the way Georgia, Texas, or Arizona is. Their high potential voters of color are just as meaningful, like the numbers are just as meaningful as anywhere in the Sun Belt, but they don't get the same kind of resources in the off cycles that they should get. And so, Florida is a southern state. It's not just a swing state, and you gotta treat it as such.
All right, good advice. And how can people find out more about Way to Win?
Oh, well, you can go check us out online, waytowin.us. We also have, there's a PAC affiliated with our work called waytolead.us. So check that out too. And we're on Twitter. Just look up Way to Win.
All right. Excellent. Well, Tory, thank you so much. This was really fun. If there were not a pandemic going on right now, I would be in Texas because Texas is clearly where it's at right now.
And I would take you for tacos and I would take you for barbecue and all the things. So one day.
All right. In 2 years, when this is all, hopefully ground is a thing again and the Texas gubernatorial race is the hottest thing anywhere, we'll reconnect.
Yes, you're on. Okay.
All right. Thanks, Tory.
Thank you.